Okay, so good morning, everybody, and welcome. This is the System Administration and Internet Working first lecture. So this is an introduction to the module. The module will be a year-long module, and so it starts now and ends sometime in May, I think the 9th of May or something like that. There will be two lecturers involved in the module. So that's me. So my name is Vasilios Adamos. Vasilios is the formal version of it. You can just call me Vasili, or you can just call me Vas. If you like, whatever you prefer, I don't mind. And then the second half is taken over by Dr. Linda Young, who is also the module coordinator. So it's her module essentially. So until the Christmas break in the first teaching block, you'll be with me. And then after Christmas, you'll be with Linda for the second half of the module. So what I want to do today is I want to show you everything, all of the information that you need about the module. So I think the best way to do this is I do have an introductory lecture, and I do have the website on Moodle as well. So since you are first year students and it is your first time around in the university, I thought I would start with the website itself. So everything you need regarding all materials that you need regarding your studies should always be on this webpage that we have that's called Moodle. So essentially it's on Moodle Port AC UK. You go there, you log in with your university username and password, and then you find a list of your modules and courses. So when you go into System Administration and Internet Working, this is the list of topics, as we call them, that you will find. So there's some general information here in the beginning, where we put announcements and student discussions. So there is a forum available here for you to discuss any topic you like online. We then have assessments and support materials. Of course, you can click on these and you can expand them. This module is assessed by three items, three artifacts, as we call them. There is a logbook for me, there is a logbook for Linda, and there is an exam, computer-based test in the end of the year, essentially in May, for both of the material that we did. There are brief instructions for the logbook assessment, and there is the logbook submission inbox. So when the time comes, this is where you will go to submit your logbook. There is some instructions on the computer-based test. You won't need this yet. And there's some late assessment as well. So basically, this means that if you miss the normal assessment deadline, so our logbook, for example, for my side, has a deadline of 11 o'clock on Tuesday, the 13th, I think, of December, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So if you miss that, then you can submit late up to 2 weeks. That's 2 working weeks, so 10 working days. And of course, because Christmas goes in the middle, that essentially becomes something like the 17th of January. However, to submit late and get full marks, you need to have something called an extenuating circumstances form, an ECF form. When you go into your student portal, when you log into your student portal, the link is right there on the bottom of the page where you can submit this. And it's a form that basically you fill it in, you include some evidence, if you were sick, a doctor's note or something like that, that says that you were unable to submit on time for whatever course you had or exam maybe, and you can submit late and get full marks for it. So other than the logbook assessments, there's a logbook marking guide, so a brief explanation of how we actually mark the logbooks, and there are some instructions to connect to A2.NET remotely as well, should you wish to do so. After that, I usually bring them all in. So automatically, every week, the current week is expanded. So this week, they all have their dates, 26th of September to 2nd of October. So the dates of the weeks that we're running through will be expanded. So the first thing that you see when you go into the module will be an expanded week, and it's this one. So this week contains Zoom meeting address, and this Zoom meeting address exists on all the other lecture weeks that we will have. So for the 3 following weeks and this one, we have a Zoom meeting address. You can click on it and join this Zoom meeting. And there will be whatever material we need, whatever we will be discussing in the lecture online every week. The first week has the intro lecture. The rest of the weeks don't really have it. They have some further information and so on, because in these lectures, I will be explaining the theory as per the lab sheets. So today, once I'm finished with the SAI intro, I will jump onto week 5, Linux setup, and I will explain the process of setting up the operating system on our computers and so on. So this is the information that you get on Moodle. Every week has its own thing. On the 31st of October to 6th of November, there is a consolidation week. So this is a week that we don't deliver any new material. We give you this week as time for you to go back through everything that you've done in the previous 5 weeks, catch up, make sure you catch up with any coursework that you might have. In my case, for this module, it's a good opportunity to make sure that you polish up your logbook and make sure that everything is up to date, and perhaps ask for some feedback from myself about your logbook, and I can help you out with it, tell you maybe what to improve on it and so on. And then we have the rest of the weeks. So they go to 7th of November and so on. There's a catch-up week on the 5th of December, which there's no new material being delivered again. And there is the last week before the Christmas break, which is the logbook assessment week. There are a lot of instructions about this. They are available already. You can read them on your own, and you can ask me about them later on. I will go through this process later on and closer to the date, and I will explain everything to you again. Okay, but it is here, so you can get a brief idea of what's going to happen on that particular day, the day of the logbook assessment. And then it's Christmas break, and then right after Christmas break, we have the exam period, which for you, for this module, you will not need to do anything, because your exam, because it's a year-long unit, your exam will be in May. So for this particular module, you don't have anything to do during the exam period. Okay. So all information you should always need, all of the material should be in here. Now, let's look at the detail the module in more detail. I don't mind if your cameras are on, guys, it's fine. So don't worry, I just need your microphones to be muted so that I don't get distracted, okay? So, unit title, System Administration and Networking. My office is in A202B. All of the names of all of the places in the university mean something. So A means Anglesey. The 2 behind it means that I'm on the 2nd floor. The 02 behind it means that it's the 2nd room on the 2nd floor. And the B behind it means that it's the 2nd part of the 2nd room of the 2nd floor. Anyway, yes, that's what it is. So my office is there if you ever need to find me. However, I am rarely in my office because I am usually teaching in the lab. The lab is a2.net, and if you haven't been yet, pop by and have a look. This is our networking lab, and it's on the 2nd floor on the far left side on the south corridor, as we call it. And this is where you will be spending your time for this module. My email, in case you cannot find me in my office or in my lab, is basilios.adamos@portac.uk. So all of our emails are basically first name dot surname @portac.uk. Okay. Also note, there is no my for the academics. The my Portac.uk is only for the students. Okay. So we'll have 4 lectures to assist you with the theory. Then we'll have 6 lab sessions to complete the practical work. And then we'll have the final session that will be, it's the one on the 12th of December, basically, that will be the assessment of the logbook. So this will be for teaching block 1. Teaching block 2, Linda will follow a similar structure as well. Give you a bit of theory, explain what we're doing in the lab the first few weeks, and then you get onto the lab and work on it. Now, the module is heavily based on practical work. We are firm believers of learning by doing rather than death by PowerPoint, which is what I'm doing now ironically, but it doesn't last long, so it's fine. So you will need to work in the lab. You can work in the lab on your allocated time slot according to your timetable. You can also come and work in the lab whenever your computer is free. So the lab's timetable will be on the door of the lab, so you can take a photo of it with your phones if you like. So you can see when other lab sessions are running in there. However, even if there is a lab session running in there, if your computer is free, you can still go and work on it. So all you need to do is ask permission from whichever whoever is running the lab at that particular time. Okay, so you can ask the permission and then you can sit down. Just make sure that your phone is on silent and you're not noisy and you don't disturb the rest of the class, because you will have an allocated computer in the lab. So the first week, on week 5, when you come into the lab, you choose a computer to sit and work on, and you work on that same computer for the rest of the year itself. Okay, so if your computer is free, whether there is a class or there isn't a class in there, you can go in and do some extra work, put in some extra time, some additional time. If you're struggling with something, or if you simply want to boost your confidence in the material, or just want to play around with the operating system, you can go in the lab and work. The lab is generally open from 8 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock in the evening, or until the caretakers kick you out. All right. So you can go and work in the evening as well. And we also do have the possibility for remote connection. So you can connect from home. There's a program that we use through X2Go, and you can connect remotely and work. Please only connect only in the evenings or during your allocated lab time. So if for some reason you're sick, you have a problem with transportation and so on, and you can't come to your lab session, you can connect remotely and work on that particular time. The only problem with that is that you will not be able to get any help from me, because I will be helping people in the lab. But at the very least, so that you don't lose the session completely, you can connect remotely and work. And of course, you can connect in the evening, let's say after 6 o'clock, and we do this because we don't want people that have a timetabled lab session to be working on a computer, and then somebody else connects onto the computer and slows them down. We do take this pretty seriously, and I do have a lovely script that goes around all of the computers in the lab, finds out which user is actually connected onto it, and if it's not the user of that particular lab session, we kick them out. Okay, so please don't try to connect before 6 o'clock, and just make sure that you only connect after 6 or when you have a lab session timetable. Now, the assessment of the module is through logbook and exam. There's a logbook for myself, which is worth 30% of the module. There's a logbook for Linda, the other 30%. Then the end of year exam is worth 40% of the module. Notes and all required material will be on Moodle, so everything you need should always be there. So the lab is a2.net with option to connect remotely. We'll allocate a computer for you from week 5, and then you need to make sure you stay on that computer for the rest of the year, essentially. So when you go in, choose one, perhaps one that the light doesn't hit it all the time and so on, whatever. There have been people in the past that have asked to come on different lab sessions. So the lab sessions for this module run on Tuesdays from morning until evening. So I think there's a class at 9, class at 11, class at 1, and class at 3, something like that. People have asked us to move around. However, and we did try to accommodate this last year. However, timetabling have complained about this quite a lot, because the problem is that we monitor attendance. So every time you come into the lab, you need to scan your card, your student card, at the door, so that we know if you have attended the session or not. If you decide to come on a different time slot, then that means that timetabling will need to change and put you on a different slot, and that means more manual labor for them. And within the thousands of students that we have in the university, they just said, we will not do this anymore. So make sure you come in the correct lab session. I understand if you have your friend working in another session or something like that and you prefer it. Unfortunately, it's not possible to accommodate this year. Okay. What we will do in the lab, so on my side of the thing, of the module at least, in TB1, we'll be working with Linux. We'll start with the installation of the operating system and familiarization with it, basic commands, location of files, and where everything is. If we do this, we start like this because some people might not have used Linux ever before in their lives. Okay, so we need to accommodate everybody. If you have used Linux before, then this should really be a walk in the park for you. Just make sure that you go through the material, go through the lab sheet, get all the screenshots that you need for your logbook and everything else, and that's it. Then we will play around a little bit with virtualization. We use VMware Player here, and we'll create a few virtual machines. We'll network them together. This is really the most complicated lab. It usually takes 2 to 3 sessions for students to go through it. But I will explain everything in great detail, so there's no need to worry about it too much. Then we'll do a little bit of routing. We'll turn a couple of our computers into routers, essentially, and we will use OSPF to do this. And then we'll build the DNS server on one of the computers that you have in the lab and configure it for your own domain and so on. So these are the technologies that you will be dealing with me in the first teaching block. Now, the logbook itself, it's an logbook, so it's an electronic document. So I usually recommend the students that they create a Google Doc, and then they can share that with me so that they can give you some feedback and so on. It's kept during the practicals and submitted at the last week of teaching block 1, after we have a one-on-one on your computer. So this means that you need to create a logbook, create a document, and then everything that you do in the lab needs to be documented in that logbook. So let's say, for example, you have the DNS lab sheet. Okay, so you need to explain in the logbook. First of all, it's a good idea to have some preparatory work, because I will explain what you need to be doing in the labs in these lectures and in the beginning of the lab sessions as well. Sometimes you can say that, yes, I have the DNS lab sheet to complete tomorrow or today or whenever. And in order to do this, I need to install the service, configure some configuration files for it, and then test it out and see that it all works. You need to have the methodology in place. The methodology is basically given to you in the lab sheets. So if you just follow the methodology in the lab sheets, you're fine. There's configuration. So all of the configuration changes that you made on the system and any configuration files that you created and any changes that you made in those files needs to go here as well. There's testing results and retesting results again, because we don't expect you to get it right the first time working, of course. So we can see the process that you followed in order to get it to work. And there's proof of working final configuration. So screenshot basically showing that, yes, the thing worked. I can ping Google, or I can ping one of my virtual machines by name and so on. And there's a conclusion, which you can write at home if you like. So, you know, this lab was very interesting. I learned how to do this or that, or this lab was useless. I didn't learn anything. We'll leave it up to you. The e-logbooks will be checked by me twice during the teaching block. The first time is optional. So as I said, during the consolidation week, you get a week that you don't have any new material delivered to you. Okay, so you can use that week to make sure that you catch up on your logbook. I will also create a new video guide. I have an older video guide, but there are a few differences now on how to make a good logbook. Okay, so a logbook creation guide, essentially. Using that guide, you can make sure that your logbook is exactly how it should be. So all of the correct sections, all of the correct information inside it, and so on. And during the consolidation week, you can share your logbook with me, and I can have a look and tell you if you're doing it right or not. Of course, if you are keeping good progress in your logbook, you can send it to me before the consolidation week, and you can basically ask me, you know, am I doing this right, and so on. Before the lab sessions in the actual lab start 1 week before the consolidation week, That's why I keep mentioning the consolidation with for feedback. So if you do the first lab sheet and you're happy with it, you can send it to me and tell me, look, this is how I've done this. Is it okay? And I'll tell you if it's, if you're doing something terribly wrong. All right. And then the second time that the logbooks will be checked will be on the week of the 12th of December. Basically, it's a week that you are not supposed to work in the lab. You're supposed to just come in the lab, start up all of the work that you've done. So start up your virtual machines, bring up configuration files on the screen and have your logbook on the screen as well. I'll come and sit with you on your computer for 5 minutes, quickly scroll through your logbook, and then check the work on your computer that it is actually the same as your logbook and everything. Perhaps ask you a couple of questions. If I need to, I might not need to. Okay. And that's how we basically assess the logbook. And then by 11 o'clock on that Tuesday, you submit the logbook on Internity, and the logbook then exists and it's ready for me to completely mark and give you a mark for it as well. Okay, so you keep the logbook during the practicals, you write down everything that you do in the labs. At the end of the semester, at the end of the teaching block, I go through the work that is done with the computer, go through your logbook, and give you a mark on the work that you've done. The exam itself is a much simpler case of, it's a 1-hour computer-based exam. It will have multiple choice, multiple response, fill in the gaps questions. It is based on the material that we will have done in the class. So there will be nothing in the exam that is, let's say, general theory about one of the technologies that we use. Okay, so all of the questions that we have in there are directly from the material that we've delivered in class and in the lab. And that's why the best resource for you to revise for the exam is actually your logbook, because that should contain everything that you've done and everything that we have delivered in the module itself. There is also a guide on the assessments tab about how to do the exams, because there is a specific format, specific way that we do it, and you can have a look at that one. It explains everything that you see when you're doing an exam, all of the panels with the questions on the top right corner, how the questions present themselves to you during the exam and so on, so that you can familiarize yourself a little bit with it. And also, we will also offer a mock exam. So I think Linda does this, I think it's about 10 questions that are samples from the database of the questions that we have for the exams. And so that you can see exactly what the exam looks like and be better prepared for it as much as you can. Recommended reading. So for me, from my side of the module, you only need to learn about Red Hat Linux a little bit. Okay, this is the book I usually recommend, and the first and most important reason I recommend this is because it's readily available online as well as a PDF. So you can find this, you can download it, you can buy it, you can buy it from Amazon if I remember correctly as well. So it's very easy to get your hands on it, and it does contain absolutely everything we need. It is a relatively old book, okay, but all of the commands and all of the information that is there are still the same today as they were when it was when it came out. Does anybody have any questions about this before I move on to explaining the lab sheet itself? You can just unmute your microphone and ask if you like. There was a version in the library, but students last year told me that it wasn't there anymore. I have asked the library, and they said that it was just basically loaned out. Okay, so you can have a look, but yes, if you want to physically have the book, and you can buy the book pretty cheap as well. Sample material for the logbooks. Yes, so when I create the video, I will show you an example of a logbook. I actually had a couple of students last year, MSc, so the principle of operation is the same, that scored 100%, so their logbooks are, well, perfect. So in the video, I will show you a logbook like that. I will not share a logbook for you of this particular module, obviously, okay? But I will show you in a video what it looks like and what the section should be like, and what the general presentation and content of it should be. The video of the logbook will be available before you start working in the labs on the 5th week. Okay, so in one of the next 2 or 3 weeks down the line, I will find the spare time that I need and make the video. Okay, but it will be before you actually start working on the labs. So before you actually need it. Any other question? Okay, so I will go a little bit through the first lab set, not in too much detail, so I'll just basically explain to you what we will be doing. So do you prefer it this way, or do you prefer it if I do this? I think this is perhaps a bit better. Yes. Okay, so the first thing that you need to do when you come into the lab is obviously choose a computer to work on. Now, when you have chosen a computer to work on, you need to log in. Depending on the lab session that you will log in, you will be given a username and a password. The usernames are VM1, VM2, VM3, and so on. So each lab session has its own different username. The reason why we do this is so that you can log on to the computers with your particular username, and then that lab session, that particular computer will have one user allocated to it throughout the rest of the year itself. Then once you do this, you don't actually work on the operating system of the host computer itself, okay? Because you're logged in as user VM1, you're not an admin user, you're not root, so you don't have permissions to do most of the tasks that we'll need to do there. What we will do is we have a VMware player installed on the computer already. So as soon as you log in, the first thing you just need to do is start up a VMware player, and then in there, you will create a blank virtual machine. So that virtual machine will be your host, will be basically the base of operations for you. And then eventually inside that virtual machine, you will install VMware player again and install some more virtual machines inside it. So this is what we call nested virtualization. The computers can take it because they are pretty powerful computers, Xeons with NVMEs and 64 gigabytes of RAM and so on. So don't worry about performance and everything else. So you will build your VM, and this is what we do in the first lab set. We build a virtual machine that will be your host. You give it some space, let's say 200 gigabytes of space, 4 CPU cores, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and you set the network card mode to bridged. This means that your network card will be bridged to the network card that takes you to the outside world on your computer. So if your computer has an IP address of 148.197.28.67, then your bridged IP address will be 28.167. So this means that you'll be on the same subnet, on the same network as every other computer in the lab. So this will give you easier access to the outside world, DNS services, and everything else that you need. So you will need to install the operating system on the virtual machine that we just created. So essentially, this paragraph creates the hardware side of things. For this, you will have an ISO image on your host computer, and you will be able to connect that and use it as a DVD in order to install the operating system onto the virtual machine. And then once you boot up the virtual machine, it will start with the installation of the operating system. Now, the operating system that we use is CentOS 7. Linux has various different flavors, various different distributions, as we call them. The two most prominent ones and oldest ones as well are Debian and Red Hat. So there are Debian-based distributions. The most notable of all of them and the most famous is Ubuntu. So Ubuntu is a Debian type distribution, and there are Red Hat type distributions. So CentOS is essentially a Red Hat type distribution. Essentially because Linux is free, when Red Hat sells their software, they're not really selling the software, they're selling the support for the operating system. And because we don't need the support, because we know enough, we think, and you have us as support, so that's why we actually use CentOS, which is basically Red Hat without the Red Hat logos. Great. So you installation, English language, yes. Okay, I didn't want to go into the gossip kite, thank you, but I will. So because CentOS was so successful, then Red Hat bought it and dismantled it. Great. However, because Linux is free, you can't really do anything about it. So the people that were working on CentOS have started working on something else, which is essentially pretty much the same thing under a different name, and it's called Rocky Linux. And it is what we will be using next year, exactly. We just tend not to rush with deployment of operating systems. We like to keep them around for about a year after they've gone out. And that's why we're not actually using Rocky straight away. Okay, we want to make sure that everybody else irons out all the little problems, and then we get a much more finalized, version of the operating system. But yes, this is the gossip. The powerful corporation that is Red Hat actually bought the guys and dismantled it. So correct, but it doesn't really matter because Linux is Linux in its space, so they can't do anything about it. So we're using CentOS, and okay, so Ubuntu is nice, but it's not used as widely in the industry. So if you have a huge data center, use data farms and everything, Red Hat is more of the business side rather than anything else. So we have Ubuntu Linux installations in the university as well. So if I remember correctly, in Liongate building, they are dual booted with Ubuntu as well. So you can get an idea of what Ubuntu looks like on those computers there. Okay, if you haven't used it before at all. So yes, CentOS and Ubuntu is what we basically use. So you need to set up all of the installation information, like the language, time zone, everything else. It's all pretty straightforward if you've installed an operating system before. The first thing that you need to be careful about is the software selection. So if you get this wrong, then you will not have all of the packages that you need on your system in order to do everything that we want to do in the labs. Okay, so this is the first thing that you need to be very careful about here. So you need to make sure that you go into software selection and you check all of the boxes for the development and creative workstation that apply, which is compatibility library, the DNS that we'll need to use later on, file and storage, and so on and so forth. So after the software selection, of course, I need to mention that if at any step of the installation, you don't feel confident about what you're doing, then it's a very good idea, we highly recommend it, that you either ask the people around you that are working, or in fact, ask me in the lab, and I will come and just verify that, what you're trying to do is correct. It's more important to do this during the installation, because once you do the installation and move on, then it will be a bit trickier for us to basically correct your installation. All right. Later on, after you've done everything, after you've installed the operating system and you're just working on configuring services and stuff, you can try a bit more autonomy. So try playing around with settings and see what happens, because it's not going to really create that much of a problem. But at least for the installation of the operating system, if you're not sure at any step, please ask around or call me just to make sure that you've installed it. Because if you install it wrong and we end up in week 7 and we realize that you don't have something installed, even though we can still install it afterwards, there might be problems and you might lose some time because of this. Okay, so be very careful with the installation, especially with the software selection and the hard drive partitioning. So what we do is we customize the partitioning that we have on our system, and we customize it in a specific way. So you have 200 gigabytes available on the hard drive, as you set up before. What we do is we have a practice in the lab that is a little bit unorthodox for Linux. So because all of the tasks that you will perform on this virtual machine will pretty much require administrative privileges, we ask you to log in as root, which yes, is a big no-no out in the real world. However, this is a test and secure environment. Okay, and instead of you typing SU to switch user all the time to type all of the commands, we ask you that you actually log in and work as user root throughout the semester. Because you're logging in as user root, your home directory is in the /root folder of the hard drive. When Linux installs, by default, it partitions the hard drive in such a way that it gives your home partition the biggest space, because the home partition will host all of the user accounts for the multiple users that will be working on the computer. In our case, this is not the case. No other user will work on this computer, only your root user. So essentially, we just delete the home partition. So we delete the home partition from the default partitioning table that the system creates, and then we allocate all of the remaining space to the /partition, which is essentially the top of your directory structure in your hard drive. So your /root folder gets all of the hard drive space that it needs for you to create your virtual machines and everything else. If you don't do this, if you don't create a partitioning correctly, then you will reach a point in the lab sits after you've created multiple virtual machines that you will run out of space and you can't do anything. And the only solution to this is to create another virtual machine. So you will lose all of the work that you've done so far. Okay. So be very careful with partitioning, especially even more so than software, because software, we can fudge it afterwards, but partitioning, we really can't. We've tried in the past, but it doesn't really work, resizing the partitions and everything else. Okay, so make sure you get your partitioning correct. If you're not sure, again, I would definitely recommend, even if you think you are sure, just raise your hand. You'll all be doing this pretty much at the same time in the lab. So I can go around, have a look, and make sure that you have the correct size, the correct space set up on your hard drives. Okay. Backups. Yes, you can make virtual machine backups. Your hard drives contain a second hard drive. Your computers contain a second hard drive. It's not an NVMe in there. And you can make backups. I think, if I remember correctly, we also make backups of them every 3 or 4 weeks. Okay. And then once you set the partitioning, you need to set up the networking. You'll all have standard IP addresses allocated to you in the labs. So depending on which computer you're sitting on, it will have an IP address. All of the IP addresses in the lab are on subnet 28. So the university basically owns a class B network that's 148.197.0.0. So hooray for us, we have 65,000 IP addresses to play around with. So everything in the lab is on subnet 28. So we have those 254 IP addresses in there to play around with. So your main computer's address will be something on 28, and then your bridged IP address for the virtual machine that you're building will be that IP address plus 100. All right. Everything else that you need, subnet mask, gateway, DNS servers, and so on, they're all the same for everybody, so you can just set them all as they are. You need to name it, so we'll set the name for these virtual machines to Prometheus NetLab Reporters UK. The Prometheus is just a name for me to use because I have virtual machines that I use as well, so we use this in the lab for the virtual machines. The NetLab part of the name is because you're in our NetLab. Okay, so all of the computers have a NetLab prefix in there, and there is a DNS server responsible for the NetLab domain in the lab. The EE stands for electrical engineering. That goes back to 20 years ago when I was a student for FRA. And that's for all of the computers in the labs, in the specialized Linux labs in Anglesey building. And the port part is because you're University of Portsmouth. The AC is because you're an academic institution, and JANET, the Joint Academic Network, is the domain controller for that. And the UK is the Tier 1 ISP that provides us with IP addresses and domains throughout the UK. Okay, so the name means something, and it's important that you set the host name to that because you need it later on for the DNS lab 6 and because you want your computer to be named correctly. All right. Begin installation. The password that we usually use for the root account is localhost1. Okay, so it's the simplest password that we can have that the system will accept. I will point out at this point that yes, you're all creating computers with settings that follow a specific pattern, so you know what other people's IP addresses are. And yes, your root password of everybody will be the same. So there is the possibility for you to mess around with other people's computers. However, we take that extremely seriously. Okay. And if we do figure out from our network logs and everything else, we do have scanners in the lab and everything. If we do figure out that somebody has SSH from one computer onto another and has trying to mess around, and if the student complains about problems, then we will kick you out of the class completely. All right. So if you do decide to go in and mess with somebody else's computer, know that you will lose access to the lab for the rest of the module if you do that. Okay, this is as strict and vindictive as we can get with somebody messing around with somebody else's computer. All right. You complete the installation. It should take about 10 minutes or maybe less now with NVMEs. Accept license configurations, finish the configuration, do everything that you need to do, and then you can basically reboot and you can log in. So you can create a username and a password. You should never use it because, as we said, we should always log in as user root. All right. Set the location to London, UK, and don't use online account and so on. Once you do this, you will be inside your virtual machine. So you will have internet access and everything else. So at that point, I highly recommend that you basically close the browser on the host, full screen your virtual machine, and always work inside your virtual machine. All right, so open the browser inside the virtual machine, go to Moodle inside Prometheus, and start working there, because this will be the easiest way for you to copy and paste information from the lab sheet onto the system, IP addresses, commands, and so on, so that you can practice with them. You will not need to work on the host computer anymore. Once you have this virtual machine going and it has internet access, then you should always just go into the lab, log into the host, start up VMware Player, start up the virtual machine, full screen it, log into the virtual machine, open the lab system there, and work in there. Now that you have the operating system going, you have the computer, what I want you to do is I want you to play around with a few of the most basic commands. If you know how to use Linux, then this will be breeze, just a walk in the park. If you don't, this is a good opportunity for you to learn and to figure out how things work in the operating system. So there are things like questions like write a short paragraph explaining what kind of information each of the / subdirectories includes, so all of the folders in the system and so on will be available for you to use. So you need to basically Google it or look it up in the book and find out what each of the / subdirectories does. Sorry, slightly distracted. If you want to ask something, please don't send it to me in a direct message. So Khalid, you just asked where can I download the file which is showing now. It's on Moodle. So if you go on Moodle, then it's here. And then the next one, the one I'm actually showing you now, is the Linux setup file here. Okay. So yes, if you send me a direct message, only I see it and I get distracted, then and then I try to answer. So just send the question out to everybody. Okay. The recording will be available, yes. So there are a few commands that I want you to play around, like the manual command, the man command, what is lscd, the most basic of the commands that you can have in Linux, essentially, so that you can see how they work, what do they actually do, and so on. And then at the end, there are some networking commands because they are of particular importance to this module as well. So how to start up network cards and so on and so forth. And once you go with all of these, then there's an additional task in the end. So it's download, install, and get Google Chrome to run while you logged in as root. The system by default won't let you. So you need to figure out why and how, and you need to document your findings. Okay, so you can't run Chrome when you're logged in as root unless you do something. So I want you to figure out what is that something that you need to do and sort it out so that it works. Okay, so this is the lab sheet that you'll have to do the first week that you come into the lab. The recording of the session will be ready as soon as it's rendered by my slow computer after I finish this. So it takes about 20 minutes usually, and I upload it on YouTube, and then I share the link on that onto Moodle. Okay, so it will be available there. So that's it for today. Sorry if I tired you, but there were a few things that I needed to, explaining with regard to how the module runs and everything else. Do you have any questions at all? You can mute your microphone and ask if you do. No? Okay, so I will stop the recording. Yes, there are lots of Linux guides. There is also something else. So if you really want to get into it, and you can look for NDG. Let's see, come on. There's something called NDG Linux Essentials. So our lovely overlords, Cisco, have partnered up with the Linux Professional Institute. They have a certification that they give out, which is the LPI certification. And that basically means that, yeah, you know Linux. All right. So they offer the course material for it through their website. So if you really want to get into it and learn Linux, and you should really, you can do this. You can sign up. It's free. And you can start the course and you can do it. There are quite a few topics. It takes quite a few weeks, depending on how much time you want to dedicate to it. And it goes into great depth and great detail about how the operating system works, all the commands and everything else. So, you know, if you want, optionally, you can do this as well. And it's a good resource to actually have and learn some more. Thanks, Kai. Yes, there are lots of guys. Yes, there are lots of guys. It's, if anything, it's very easy to find a place to learn something about Linux. It's free, so everybody uses it, customizes, and so on. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. I will stop sharing and I'll stop the recording as well.